嗨，我是1250911欧法亿王博勇 and I'm covering the question number 1 and the first question of question number 5.
Okay, I'm now covering the first question. And we can see the questions. Number 1, what is federal funds rate? The federal funds rate is the interest rate at which banks lend money to other banks. And why has federal funds rate been kept at a very high level in the United States? This is because the inflation rate is pretty high in the US. The central bank keeps the federal funds rate at such a high level to decrease the money that banks can lend out, lowering the overall money supply on the market, combating the inflation. And okay, we move on to question number 2. What is discount rate? The discount rate is the interest rate charged by central banks, such as the Federal Reserve, on short-term loans they provide to commercial banks. Why did Central Bank of Taiwan increase its discount rate to deal with the inflation problem in March? Just like the US, this practice can make the banks borrow less and make less loans, therefore reduce the money supply and reach the goal of lowering inflation. Okay, question number 3. What is real exchange rate? The real exchange rate measures the value of one country's currency in terms of another country's currency, adjusted for relative price levels. And it says, use the open macroeconomy model to explain why capital flows have caused real exchange rate to rise in USA. Okay, we can see the diagram below. Let's see. Okay, according to the inflation mentioned above, we can tell that in the market for loanable funds here, the supply decreases. So the supply moved to the red, the new supply. The real interest rate become higher, and accordingly, the net capital outflow become lower. You can see it's the black one is the original state, and the red one is the new one. So we can see in the third diagram, the net capital outflow become lower, which directly affect the supply in the market for foreign currency exchange to decrease, making the real exchange rate to rise. Here we can see here. Okay, and the question number 4. What is nominal exchange rate? Draw a diagram for Tokyo foreign currency exchange market. On the diagram, the vertical axis, the Japanese yen. Okay. Okay, let's see the question number 4. Okay, what is nominal exchange rate? The nominal exchange rate is the rate at which one currency can be exchanged for another currency. And for the diagram we can see here, it mentioned that the exchange rate is 155. So the diagram would look like this. And the factor of this is the demand curve can be affected by the interest rate of these two countries, the US and the Japan, and the increasing demand for US dollar due to the capital outflow. While the supply curve can be affected by the quantity of US dollar and Japanese yen. Okay, let's move on to question number 5. Suppose that initial equilibrium nominal exchange rate was 150, and okay, let's just move right on to the diagram here. Okay, we can see that the initial equilibrium is 150 yen here for 1 US dollar, and the continuous capital outflow causes the demand for US dollar to increase, raising the equilibrium to 160 yen for 1 US dollar. So you can see the initial state of this market is the equilibrium is at 150, the black one, and due to the demand increase, so the demand moved to the red one, and the equilibrium moved to increase to 160. And the central bank tries to pull the nominal exchange rate down by selling US dollar and buying back yen in order to increase the supply of US dollar, making the new equilibrium of 155 yen for 1 US dollar. So the final state of this is you can see the supply curve move to the blue supply curve, which is the final equilibrium, would lay on 155 yen for $1. Okay, and this is the question number 1, the all 5 small question of it.
Hi, I am Li Yici from Business Administration. My student ID is EE23064. Today I'm going to solve question 2 and the second part of question 5. The first question. First, tariffs on Chinese exports will increase, so the cost of foreign consumers to purchase Chinese products will increase too. Therefore, the demand for Chinese goods will decrease. This results in China's aggregate demand will decrease. The second part, foreign investors will reduce investments in China, causing the interest rate to drop. So China's aggregate demand will fall. You can look at the graph here. The demand curve will shift left. The second question. First, there will be a reduction in foreign direct investment. The second one, this leads to layoffs and unemployment. Third, because of the unemployment we mentioned in the second part, there will be lower disposable income. So, the aggregate demand will fall. The third question, because of the unstable price, there will be a reduction of purchases of large assets. The second, the financial institutions will be more cautious in lending. So, this results in China's aggregate demand will fall. The fourth question, because of the wealth effect, there will be a reduction in wealth for people. So people might spend less, so the spending will decrease. The second, business investments will decrease. This means capital expenditure decrease. Both of these results in aggregate demand decrease. The fifth question. First one, the short run. In a trade war, the exports will decrease and the cost of imports will increase. The second one, leaving of foreign companies. This leads to the investments decrease. Third one, real estate crisis. This results in consumers' purchases will decrease. The fourth one, stock market crash. Like we mentioned before, the wealth effect. The wealth for people decrease, leads to the spending and investment will fall. All of this results in real GDP and price level falls. We can look at the graph here. The aggregate demand curve shifts left. So the equilibrium price level will fall and the quantity of output will fall too. Now, in the long run, the economy will adjust, returning real GDP to potential output, as you can see in the graph. The sixth question. I would suggest using the fiscal policy that rises the government spending and tax cuts. These will boost aggregate demand. Seventh, I will suggest the Central Bank of China to use the monetary policy to make the interest rate decrease. These will boost the aggregate demand.
Hi, I am 1230503气管一严成印, and today I'm going to solve the third questions and the third part of the fifth questions. So let's look at the third questions. It's mainly said that the European Union is banning the Russian seaborne crude oil and some petroleum products, and this section sent energy prices to a historic high. So the first question, he wants us to use the graph to explain why this section caused the energy price rise sharply. So we can use the basic graph of the supply curve and the demand curve. So mainly the supply, because of the ban, the supply curve shifts left, so causing the quantity, decrease the quantity and increase the price. And the second question is, how could this sanction affect overall price in the European Union in the short run? And the output, the unemployment. Yeah. So, this course is mainly discussing the change in the short run aggregate supply because of the ban of the oil. Yeah. So we can look at this graph. So the horizontal is quantity of the output, and the vertical is the price level. So first, because of the ban, it decreased in the aggregate supply. Yeah, so this is the aggregate supply 1, and the supply curve shifts left and become the aggregate supply curve 2. So the equilibrium from here move to here. So this is the new equilibrium, and it caused on the quantity of output. So the quantity of output falls in the short run. Yeah, falls here. So, and as the output falls, the unemployment rises. And about the price level, we can see here, it moves from price 1 to price 2. So the price level increase and the unemployment increase and the output falls. Let's move to the third part. If European Union authority would like to solve the inflation problem, what kind of fiscal policy is appropriate? The main goal of the government is to reduce the aggregate demand. Why is that? Because if we reduce the aggregate demand, this is the original demand, right? So if we move it left, we decrease the aggregate demand, and it can cause the output, the GDP, become lower, and while the curve moves left, the price will go down simultaneously, and the aggregate supply doesn't change. So we have to change the aggregate demand. Yeah, and how to let the aggregate demand curve shift left? The first one, we can decrease the government spending, and it can reduce the demand. And the second, we can increase the taxes, and it can decrease the consumption. So both of the way can move the demand curve shifts left. And the third part is, if European Union would like to solve the recession problem, is the opposite condition of the third question. So what kind of monetary policy? So we need to focus on the monetary policy. Yes, and for the monetary policy, in this case, we have to increase the money supply. My way is to increase the money supply. Why is that? Because as we increase the money supply, the money supply curve shifts right? And so it can cause the interest rate lower. So while the interest rate is lower, the aggregate demand will increase. So if we discuss in the graph, we can see that the aggregate demand curve shifts right? So from here to here, and the equilibrium point from here to here. And what will it cause? It causes the increase of the output of the real GDP increase, and the price level increase too. So the main goal of this question is to increase the aggregate demand. How to solve it? You have to increase the money supply first, the first step, and it will lower the interest rate, and the investment will rise up, and meanwhile the GDP will rise too. So unless the price level will rise. So according to these two, we can solve the recession problems. And the last question is, could European authority use a single policy to simultaneously solve both inflation and the recession? And for me, the answer is no, because the policymaker cannot offset both inflation and recession simultaneously. So why is that? We can use the graph to discuss. So for the first one, if policymaker increase the aggregate demand, it will help solving the recession, but not the inflation. Why is that? Because if we increase the aggregate demand, it will help the price to rise and increase the real GDP. So it's a good way for solving recession, but not inflation. And if the policymaker decrease the aggregate demand, it helps the inflation, but not the recession. It's the totally opposite condition. So yeah, if we decrease the aggregate demand, the price will get low and the GDP will decrease too. So it's a good way to solve inflation, but not recession.
Hi, I am 123051057甲胡树杰, and today I will introduce the question 4 and question 5. Okay, the question 4. Okay. Use a graph of money market to explain why an increase in money supply cannot lower short-term interest rate. Okay. And suggesting the existence of liquidity trap. Okay. Because the interest rate was low enough like this, so when the money supply increase, the interest rate wouldn't decrease. Yeah, wouldn't decrease. Okay. Question 2. What is QE and what's the difference between QE and conventional monetary policy? Okay, QE is the central banks purchase long-term bonds from the markets to increase the money supplies and encourage the economy. Yeah, and the conventional monetary policy is by adjusting the short-term interest rate, yeah, to influence the economic activity. Okay. And 3 is introduce the QE policy by USA between 2008 and 2014. Yeah, let's see. At 2008, the financial crisis, so government start QE, and the 2009 start QE1 to 2010. Yeah, and the USA government spent 1.725 trillion billion to bought MBS. And at 2011, the QE2, government spent 0.6 trillion to bought the long-term bonds. Yeah. And at 2012 and 2012, the Operation Twist, the government sold short-term bonds and bought the long-term bonds. And at 2013, the QE3, yeah, if the inflation rate greater than 2.5% or the unemployment rate smaller than 6.5%, the QE will be end. Yeah, and at 2014, the QE was end. Yes, and the QE. And the question 4 is explain why QE could increase aggregate demand. And so because QE will increase the money supply, and the interest rate will fall. So the aggregate demand will increase. Yeah. And the number 5 is just because the interest rate falls, the quantity of the money increase, the consumption will increase, and the aggregate demand will increase too. Yeah, this is question 4. Okay, let's see the number 5. They think the Trump's tariff policy could not solve the trade imbalance problem with China, and explain why. So I think because the high tariff will not only decrease the import, but lead to the retaliatory measure from China. Just like Chinese government will lower the RMB exchange rate to to increase their export, and so decrease import will be not effect. Yeah, just like this.
And I also covered the question, the big question number 5. The first question of question number 5, yes. And we can see the question here. It says that in the United States, Republican Party follows the principle of supply-side economics, or so-called Reagan economics, whereas Democrat Party follows the principle of demand-side economics, or so-called Keynesian economic. Explain the difference between supply-side economics and demand-side economics. Okay, we can see down below. For the supply-side economics, it focuses on boosting economic growth by increasing the supply of goods and services. The main idea is that lowering barriers for producers, such as taxes and regulations, will lead to increased production, job creation, and overall economic growth. One of its policies, one of the supply-side economics policy is to have a tax cut, which reduces taxes on businesses and high-income individuals to encourage investment and entrepreneurship. And we can see, on the other hand, for demand-side economics, it emphasizes the role of aggregate demand in driving economic growth and stability. The focus is on boosting consumption and investment through government intervention, particularly during economic downturns. And one of its policy is to increase taxes, such as progressive taxation, where higher income individuals pay a larger share, and tax relief for lower income individuals to increase their disposable income and spending.
The second part, Trump implements tax cuts in line with supply-side economic principles in order to stimulate investment and economic growth. Biden implemented tax increase policies aligned with demand-side economics. This mostly focusing on increasing government's revenue to support infrastructure development and welfare.
So let us move to the third part. As mentioned, the tax rate was reduced to encourage the investments. So how can this Trump policy influence the market for loanable fund in USA? What happens to real interest rate, the net capital outflow, and the real exchange rate, and the trade balance in USA? So let us use the graph to introduce what's happening. So because Trump is encouraging the domestic investments, so we can know that because of the investment, the demand in loanable funds will increase. And meanwhile, because of the demand curve shifts right, it will increase the interest rate, as we can see, move to the R2, and the loanable funds amount, the amount of loanable funds will increase from Q1 to Q2. And we can move to the net capital outflow graph. Because of the same rates, interest rates, we can see that the vertical is the interest rate and the horizontal is the net capital outflow. We can see that because of the rate increase, so the amounts of the net NCO decrease from here to here. And to the third graph, it is the market for foreign currency exchange. So the vertical one is the real exchange rate and the horizontal one is the dollars. So as about the NCO decrease, so the NCO curve shifts left. And as the NCO curve shifts left, we can move to the exchange rate. The exchange rate moved from E1 to E2, so the real exchange rate rise. And what about the trade? What about the trade balance in the USA? We can look back to the net export. So the net export moved from here to here. It decreased. The amount decreases. So for the fifth part, the net export decreases, and it caused the trade deficits in the USA.
Let's see the question 5 and number 4 and number 5. Okay, number 4. A high tariff will decrease the import and reduce trade deficit of USA. And how can this Trump's tariff policy influence the market for foreign currency exchange? And what happened to real exchange rate and the trade balance? Okay. First, the decrease of the trade deficit of USA will increase the net export. So the demand for dollar will increase. The demand increase, the real exchange rate will increase too. So the real exchange rate rise, and the trade balance will change from trade deficit to trade surplus.